Welcome to the channel guys, and to those return viewers, welcome back. Today we're continuing our deep dive into who really is the worst Primarch. For those who haven't seen part 1 or 2, do yourself a favour and check them both out. They're an excellent listen if I do say so myself. I'll leave the links in the description of this video. Now there are so many tier lists, power scale and special ability videos about the Primarchs all over the internet, especially YouTube. As always at Titan Wargaming, we seek to be different to all other channels, but whatever we do, do it well and with intent. So what we have done is set out to create a 4-part series that considers each Primarch with as unbiased opinion as possible and rate them across 3 criteria, with the primary goal being deciding once and for all who really is the worst Primarch. So far, in parts 1 and 2, we discussed Lorgar, Sanguinius, Alfarius and Omegon, Leman Russ, Magnus the Red, Ferrus Manus, Mortarion, Rabute, and finally, Perturabo. To aid us in considering the worth of each Primarch, we're using 3 criteria to provide as objective scoring as possible. I'll provide a recap now on the details of each criteria. However, for those who have already listened to our first video, if you're not into hearing this bit again, just check the chapters and skip ahead to our first Primarch, Angron. Now, just be aware, we are using canon examples to justify the score for each Primarch to be as objective as possible. We don't want to play favourites with these siblings. Last time that happened, the whole galaxy nearly went to hell. Our first criteria of measure is in regards to a Primarch's achievements. These could be relating to military operations where humanity's history was rewritten in the crucible of battle, or peaceful agendas in an age soaked in blood. Some Primarchs even planned beyond the military purpose of their legions, and put themselves to work assisting humanity and bettering themselves when not campaigning. I believe these are all important considerations when assessing the achievements of a Primarch. One major factor we must also bear in mind is that considering fully half the 18 Primarchs turned to chaos, measuring these individuals' success against purely imperial ideologies and achievements would automatically place them all on the lowest 9 ranks. For this reason, we must keep an open mind and perhaps extend our criteria to more general characteristics and achievements, so as to keep the playing field level. For example, terrible achievements can still be great in their magnitude. Secondly, the negative events a Primarch brought about through brash mistakes, an imperfect temperament at odds with the perfection of their gene crafting, or some other circumstance. It is easy to judge these actions retrospectively, as we must keep in mind the Primarchs wielded great power and were not perfect. A misjudgment or miscalculation could have severe repercussions when commanding the military force of thousands of elite military personnel and voidcraft. As most 40k lore addicts are aware though, there are quite the number of tragic and unfortunate events to choose from. As we noted earlier in the video, if we were to judge the traitor Primarchs on such a basis, they would all receive the lowest mark possible, as their dedicated actions would bring much suffering and death to the galaxy. In their case, we can assess the issues they caused whether purposefully or unwittingly during their time as loyalists, rather than once they threw their lot in with the Dark Pantheon. Lastly, we'll consider a Primarch's character and personality, and how at times these attributes affected those they were associated with, such as their brothers, legionary sons, or the Imperium in general. We can to a degree lean on the wisdom of our ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle. His teachings on what is a good person outline 4 main core traits. Aristotle states the 4 cardinal virtues to define a good person are wisdom, temperance, justice, though not the Nostraman kind, and finally, fortitude. Clearly, the 18 Primarchs are not mere mortals, and so their frame of mind and the general grand scale of their plans and foresight is not able to be understood easily, though we can still do our best in trying. Angron. When taking into consideration the past life and achievements of the insensate being that was Angron, Primarch of the 12th Legion, there are sadly not a great many virtuous acts or resounding noble victories for humanity to tally against himself or his legion. Perhaps the most noble act Angron was capable of was taken away from him just before its time of accomplishment. Unlike his Primarch brothers, Angron would not unite the people of his world. Nuceria, the world he was fated to land upon as an infant, would not know the enlightenment that Prospero did, or the living standards of the 500 worlds. No, all that Nuceria had in store for Angron was violence and everlasting regret. And all that Angron had in store for this world in turn was revenge through death. Even after breaking free of his gladiator bonds alongside his fellow slaves, Angron could not achieve a victory, whether it be through military means or diplomatic. Angron's only chance to take control of Nuceria from the callous grip of the ruling elite to which Angron referred to as High Riders would come when doing battle with the High Riders' armies. We do learn that ultimately there was only a small handful of elite which ruled this planet, though their power and influence was immense. Needless to say, Angron's chosen tactic of raising cities and battling armies was not the wisest of choices, and definitely didn't have humanity's best interest at its core. Were a different Primarch within the same position, one who was more capable of uniting a people, or if Angron would not have been mutilated by the butcher's nails, perhaps he could have applied more tact and diplomacy to his campaign across Nuceria, gathering supporters and uniting its people. However, what eventuated was simply rolling bloody battles until the High Riders consolidated their strength and formed one mighty host which could unquestionably quash Angron's rebellion. Given the rage and the pain Angron felt living the life he had and being manipulated within his own mind by the nails, he welcomed this death, and on the eve of battle had made his peace, proud to die alongside the only family he'd ever known. Now we will speak about this more shortly. However, I do hope you can see and appreciate that from the get-go, well before his discovery by the Emperor, Angron's potential within the Great Crusade, and indeed wider humanity, or his use as the Emperor would term it, was robbed from him, ensuring that the criteria we have been using thus far are very one-sided, not in his favour. Considering Angron's achievements, breaking the shackles of slavery at Nuceria and taking their armies to battle was of course a supreme feat of skill and bloody-minded determination. However, in itself not nearly as great as other Primarchs on their homeworlds, as unification is more preferable to revenge through murder. Therefore, I don't believe we can use it to rate as an achievement, but worth noting for its lack of greatness. Following his unwanted appointment to Primarch of the Warhounds and lead of the 13th Expeditionary Fleet, Angron would conquer many worlds during the Great Crusade, and in fact a great many once the Butcher's nails were implanted within his legion, though a great many of these were hollow victories in the eyes of his fellow Primarchs, in that the manner of which worlds were brought into the fold of the Imperium were aggressive and at times just slaughters of an inferior foe. Even within the World Eater's own culture, if a planet was not conquered within 31 hours, the same length as the Nucerian day, Angron would force decimation upon his own sons. Another reason victory over a conquered planet may be considered hollow by its new masters. For these reasons, I do not believe we could score Angron greater than a 1 for achievements. I must say it does pain me to do this, because personally I love the way Angron has been developed over the course of the Horus Heresy novels, but I promised an unbiased as possible opinion. I'll note to any World Eater fans, or even if you just like painting, or indeed just want to see me suffer, I'll soon be doing a 24-hour plus painting challenge of a 2K World Eaters force, so keep your eyes peeled and let me know in the comments whether this is something you're looking forward to watching me torture myself with. On the subject of misdeeds, Angron definitely had his moments. We've mentioned the decimation he would force upon his legion. However, I'll also state he'd make his legionaries carry this out by their own hand against their brothers. Truly horrific, though in line with the character and motivations of somebody who can only feel happiness through the suffering of others. An act of brutality that would set the standards for the Warhounds, soon to be renamed the World Eaters, was when Angron, newly united with his legion, then aptly murdered the majority of the command structure. You see, on the eve of his martyrdom on Nuceria, ready to face a noble death against that High Rider army alongside his gladiator brothers and sisters, the Emperor of Mankind would teleport Angron back to his ship, rather than letting him die, seeing his son's death as a waste of materials if nothing else. Angron's brothers and sisters, now leaderless and believing Angron had abandoned them, would be slaughtered to the last by the Nucerian professional army, their bodies left to rot and their bones bleach in the Nucerian sun, a stark reminder to any who would stand above their station. To Angron, the theft of the lives of his family, as well as his honour, was an unforgivable slight and would be the primary cause for Angron's siding with Horus during the heresy. After being united with his legion, Angron's fury was unimaginable in its base ferocity, and any ranking member of the Warhounds who dared to approach their Primarch was killed by him. This even included the Master of the Legion, who had commanded the Warhounds prior to the discovery of their Primarch, something I'm sure he regretted in his last moments. The final and perhaps most historic of cruelties Angron would subject his legion, and indeed the known galaxy to, was the implantation of the Butcher's Nails throughout his entire legion. We see firsthand in the novel Slave of Nuceria how the legionaries of the World Eaters so hungered for their Primarch's acceptance, but also how they loathed him, knowing he was a broken thing, the only legion to feel this way about their Primarch. It was this want for approval though that would drive so many of their number to volunteering to receive the prototype nails during the device's early days of development. Unfortunately for so many, all failed attempts also resulted in the legionary's death. When apothecary Garland Serlac developed a prototype Butcher's Nails, which he believed would at last prove compatible with the legionary's brain, it was Khorne who volunteered. Given the wanton murder of his own legionaries and the approval of mass implantation of the very device which destroyed his own self into his sons, we must score Angron a 1 for misdeeds. Besides the likes of Khorne or Latara Sarin when concerning legion matters, or Lorgar during the heresy, I cannot recall any meaningful times that Angron chose to heed the counsel of a calmer mind or indeed counsel himself to keep a level head, instead of giving into rage-fueled tendencies where we could use those events to perhaps balance out Angron's score to a 2. But it seems it wasn't meant to be. To judge Angron's character, you would think, should be very straightforward, much like he is. However, I do believe we should, in all fairness, consider Angron's character before and after the implantation of the Butcher's Nails. I do not believe it is either fair or unbiased to judge him against criteria within only a certain period of his life, dismissing his personality prior to his implantation. This is primarily because the device called the Butcher's Nails caused Angron to behave out of character and overall poorly. A real shame pertaining to Angron's overall character and indeed purpose within the Primarch Brotherhood is the clear contrast in the man Angron would be after being discovered by the Emperor compared to his original persona between being discovered by the High Riders up to the installation of the nails. Before Angron's implantation with the nails, we see a being who is very empathetic towards others, to the point he can take away emotional as well as physical pain. He cares deeply not only for his fellow slaves, but also the combatants he must face in the ring, and ultimately kill for survival. Given this gift, and knowing there may be others he just was not able to develop before his mutilation, it does make you wonder as to the Emperor's intended purpose for Angron. Perhaps he was intended to be a grounding force for his brothers, ensuring they remained level-headed and on task. Or perhaps his purpose was as a healer, a Primarch who was capable of healing others, even demigods, of life-threatening wounds. Sadly, we will likely never know. What do you think Angron's intended purpose was? Leave a comment if you have an idea. Post Butcher's Nails, we can at least give Angron a small amount of credit for identifying the Emperor as the most supreme High Rider of them all. Though let's not get bogged down in the debate as to whether the Emperor's many misdeeds were justifiable or not, at least not in this video. He also had the acuity to realise and give voice to the fact that rather than liberating systems and their people, the Emperor's crusading fleets were committing genocide on whole worlds and even systems simply for the crime of either not agreeing with the imperial truth or not living a life in line with his perspective. Of course, he still carried out these compliances, and at its core, this negative stance on his father was due to the Emperor's removal of Angron from New Syria against his will. Though it is extremely perplexing, and even frustrating, that the Emperor deigned to not intervene on the conflict and save the lives of Angron's allies and family, something he could have achieved easily. The only reason we have for this misdeed from the big man himself, when asked that very question by Angron, is that he has larger, more demanding projects to work on, and so does Angron. So basically, that their deaths and indeed their lives did not matter in the grand scheme of his plans. It is true the likes of the Lion got to elevate Luther to great status and power after his discovery by the Emperor, and even Lorgar with Corvus. This one choice by the Emperor would perpetuate character flaws already present thanks to the nails, and perhaps give some credence and understanding in why Angron is the way he is. The proposed reason I like best for this was because the Emperor wanted to break Angron and bring him to heel. Upon their first meeting, Angron refused to join the Emperor and take command of his legion, preferring to fight and die alongside his gladiator fellows. The Emperor, in allowing these people to die, removed that reason for Angron to not join him, callous as it was. It is also a curt reminder of the Emperor's power. You do not have true free will, only the length of the leash allowed by him, and you will do as you are told. Conversely to all these motivations and what ifs, Angron, following the implantation of the nails, possessed none of Aristotle's 4 pillars of what a good person is. He had no care for wisdom, in that he knew what was right and was capable of higher musings, but chose instead violence because it was the only act that would bring him joy or indeed peace. His temperance has its obvious flaws. He had a sense of justice, however, when it pertained to his own legion he chose cruelty instead. And his fortitude was permanently tested, stretched and poked, resulting in Angron's permanent state of irritation and seemingly irrational anger. In all, between pre and post Butcher Nails Angron, I was going to rate him a 2. However, there just isn't enough substance or intent in the actions of Angron prior to his implantation of the nails to counterbalance the overwhelming negatives. He will therefore be given a 1. This means Angron has come out of this review with the lowest possible and our first ever total score of 3. Bottom of the rung for sure. However, we still have 8 more Primarchs to rate. Before we get into the Lion, I just want to say a massive thank you to everyone that has commented, liked, subscribed, hit the notification bell, and shared our content recently. When people react to the videos, the algorithm spreads them to even more people. Our channel growth has been enormous, and we are fast approaching the almighty 1000 sub mark. Once a channel hits this mark, it generally gives you a lot more pull with businesses to help with sponsoring and affiliate deals. The goal for us, besides making entertaining content for you, is to also provide affiliate links for stores in your area, no matter where you are in the world, to help with cheaper pricing of hobby materials, models, audiobooks, and the like. So if you want to be one of those day ones with us from the start as we grow and begin to form a community, hit that sub button and notification bell so you're made aware of when we release more content. Okay, let's get back to the review. Lionel Johnson, Primarch of the First and the Emperor's own ultimate sanction. An argument could be made that Lionel Johnson is the most loyal of all 18 known Primarchs. So trusted by the Emperor were the Lion and his first among equals, the Dark Angels, that the Emperor himself would trust them with extremely powerful weaponry from the dark and secretive vaults underneath Terra. Equipment the First Legion could use to otherwise obliterate the enemies of man to their base atoms. We've done a short on these Dark Angels weapons from the Dark Age of technology. Go check it out if you're interested. So powerful was the Lion's presence that we see legionaries not even of the Dark Angels snap to their knees and quiver in his presence, even the mighty Captain Typhon of the Death Guard. When we consider achievements we can attribute to the Lion, there are indeed many intense and defining battles as well as duels the Lion took part in which we could review. However, rather than the standard old Great Crusade compliance record, I'm going to suggest one which you guys will either agree wholeheartedly with or deny completely. I believe the greatest act that Lion L. Johnson ever committed was listening to Konrad Curze. Why? Because the simple act of considering the unsettling words of a madman may just have saved the Emperor of Man himself, and therefore all humankind. For those who have not read The Unremembered Empire, or are not familiar with this particular lore, the loyal Primarchs Guilliman, Sanguinius, and the Lion have formed a secondary imperium of sorts within Guilliman's own empire of the 500 worlds, called Imperium Secundus. This is because, with the galaxy riven by warp storms, and the Astronomicon invisible to all, the scattered loyalist forces do not know whether Terra has been taken by the traitors or not. It just so happens during this time that the Primarch of the Night Lord's Legion, Konrad Curze, was present on the Dark Angel's vessel, though the Lion was aware and in the process of hunting him down prior to their arrival at Macragge. Unfortunately for the citizens of Macragge, the Night Haunter would find a way off the Lion's flagship and onto the surface, content to entertain himself with murdering his various brothers' legionaries and generally just making a mess of the new Imperium they were attempting to forge. After finally trapping the wretched creature, Konrad was tried and sentenced to execution. Sanguinius prepared to perform the act. Moments prior to Konrad's execution at the hands of his angelic brother, the Lion is making ready his departure from the Imperium Secundus, having broken the trust of his brothers and been essentially banished by Sanguinius. The Lion does, however, keep mulling over the ramblings of his accursed brother, Curze. Something just does not feel right, and he is determined to put his finger on it. When recalling his various conversations with Curze in his pursuit of the beast over the surface of Macragge, he recalls Konrad Curze stating that, years from then, he foresaw himself being assassinated by an agent sent by the Emperor himself. This one snippet of truth from the mouth of a serpent would ensure fiery retribution was levelled down upon the traitor forces making their way to Terra. If the Emperor was still alive in the future to dispatch this assassin, then surely he still lived now, and the Imperial Palace may even still stand. Even now, it could be repulsing the foul hordes at its doorstep. This fact, and the possibility they may yet make it to their father's side, roused the three Primarchs into action, all making speedy preparations so as to aid their kindred. The primary reason I believe this is so great an achievement is that by making this realization, Sanguinius and his legion of Blood Angels were able to aid in the defense of Terra. During the siege, we know Sanguinius personally slew Kabunda, as well as his demonic brother, Angron. He also, perhaps more importantly, would duel Horus prior to the Emperor arriving, thus wounding the fallen Primarch and allowing the Emperor to capitalize on this, aiding him in successfully breaking the siege. Let me know in the comments if you can think of any achievements of the Lions which are more pivotal in history than that piece of lore. Now, that's perhaps slightly underwhelming for an achievement by somebody with the moniker of the Lion, so let's consider another. There was a dark time in Imperial history well prior to the Legiones Civil War, which marked the most bloody and desperate fighting humankind had ever partaken in. This bloody campaign was called the Rangdan Genocides. Given the importance of this war, composed of 3 campaigns in total, little actual lore is known and documented over the years. In universe, this is because the secretive master of the First Legion commands they be redacted due to how close humanity came to extinction, not wishing the wider agencies of the Imperium to learn the truth. In our terms, this may either be because it just hasn't been explored yet, or because it is known that during the campaigns, the executed and redacted 2nd and 11th Primarchs and their legions also took part. Of course, we don't know much at all about those legions and their genetic forebears, so if Games Workshop were to explore the Rangdan Xenocides, they would have to either be very careful to omit details involving these legions, or commit to telling their stories. What is known for certain during this time is the battles which constituted the overall xenocide of the Rangdan and their slave races were so immense in scale, not only of the body count, but the cataclysmic weaponry used by both sides, that the imperial casualties suffered during the Rangdan Xenocides were second only to that of the Horus Heresy era. We also know that there were a range of Primarchs and Astartes legions taking part in the ongoing effort against the Rangdan, not to mention millions of other imperial reinforcements. However, it is said that the primary commander of the ongoing efforts against the powerful Rangdan, and indeed the eventual victory, was in fact the Lion himself, lending fair credence to the notion that he was the greatest strategist among his brothers. I do believe this is a solid nod on behalf of the Lion's tactical prowess, even if the detail is scant. Between these two instances, I would be comfortable in awarding the Lion a 3 for achievements. If commanding the forces which stopped the strongest alien force ever assembled against the Imperium at that time wasn't enough, then ensuring the Angel was at Terra to help defend his father and humankind surely must be. I believe the majority of instances where the Lion has made some questionable action and his cold attitude in general could be misconstrued as misdeeds, but I'll cover the Lion's demeanour and these relevant issues in the character part of this review. As far as misdeeds truly go, instances where the Lion acted in a way that belie his greater purpose or station above that of baseline humanity are thankfully few and far between. I think the largest misstep on the Lion's part, and likely one born of desire for the title of War Master, was his gifting of the siege engines Eradicant and Obliteratus to his traitor brother, Perturabo. Of course, at the time, Lionel Johnson was not aware that Perturabo had sided with Horus, and he also wasn't to know the galaxy-wide turmoil which would arise from Horus' betrayal. Otherwise, he would have kept those weapons. No, in seeing Horus the War Master of the Imperium cast his loyalty aside so openly, Lionel Johnson saw an opportunity for himself. This opportunity, it seems, was one which had passed him by so easily years prior. This was the chance to be crowned War Master of the Imperium. In secret conversation with Perturabo, the Lion would gift him these 2 mighty siege engines, weapons so powerful they were in a class of their own, on the proviso that once Horus' little uprising was defeated, Perturabo would publicly support the Lion's bid for War Master. Now, I don't need to tell you what a critical error this was, gifting the Master of Siege Warfare 2 of the most powerful siege engines in the galaxy before he would campaign towards the Imperial Palace, or how shameful it is that the Lion, a man trusted by the Emperor personally to safeguard powerful weapons which cannot be trusted in the hands of others, would freely give these 2 away for mere political sway and personal gain. To play the devil's advocate for one moment though, I may be judging the Lion too harshly. It is possible that the Lion saw Horus turning as a sign that only he could be trusted among all his brothers, for if the greatest of them fell, in the Lion's mind, he wasn't about to trust anybody else with the title of War Master. In saying this, he may have decided to lobby for the position of War Master himself with the aim to ensure history would not repeat itself, for in his eyes, loyalty is its own reward, and there's no way he would ever relinquish his oaths of service to the Emperor or the Imperium. Regarding the criteria of misdeeds or negative events brought about by the Lion, we will assign him a 2. It could be said, probably very easily, that the Lion's tendency to walk his own path, keep his own counsel, and practice secret keeping even from his allies during a time of constant war, was very internecine in its nature. These character flaws would have several repercussions for the Lion and his allies. In one instance, it would even prove the undoing of his relationships with his brothers Sanguinius and Guilliman within their Imperium Secundus, thus resulting in Sanguinius banishing the Lion and his legion. Luckily, this wasn't to matter, as the ideal of Imperium Secundus as a replacement Imperium and bastion for defence against the full traitor legion forces was proved devoid of value mere moments after this occurred. Another instance where this want to keep all relevant detail to himself would backfire on the Primarch is when he stationed Luther on Caliban and bade him to not leave the planet, stating, "I must know where my hand is at all times." This, of course, resulted in a very malcontent Luther turning to the forces of the Pantheon, which ultimately resulted in the destruction of Caliban itself. Good leaders, those who recognise the importance of their direct reports, know to trust them with a certain degree of detail and scope of the bigger picture. In this way, they too can grow, make their own calls, and learn their own lessons. When you shoehorn capable people into mindless positions where they are micromanaged, told only the minimum, then they do become discontent and a want to act out, as we see with Luther. Of course, there were other deep-hearted resentments already at play within that duo's relationship dynamic. However, the Lion sealed the deal when he treated Luther this way. Perhaps the most powerful and defining trait of the Lion was his utterly incorruptible loyalty to the Emperor of Mankind and his Imperium. We see this no more convincingly than when he cannot be tempted by the greater demon of Tsench, Kairos Fateweaver, in a ploy to claim the Dark Angels either for itself or chaos in general. The abominable consciousness that is Tsench allows its champion to make a bid for the Lion's service and in turn his soul. However, when facing down the Primarch aboard his own vessel, the creature is dumbfounded because it could not find any motivation or temptation which could remotely give the Primarch of the First Legion pause for thought. As the Lion would say, loyalty is its own reward. In conclusion, I do believe a positive score should prevail over one wholly negative. Not only is this because of the staunch loyalty exhibited by the Lion throughout the Horus Heresy novels, but because he does exhibit the 4 character traits we are leaning on for scoring within the consideration of one's character. The Lion does possess a wisdom of sorts, a sharp and keen wisdom, if there is a term for such a thing, but I cannot deny its presence. He does maintain his temperance, though we do see it seething just below the surface on more than one occasion. It often comes across as terse exchanges in conversation, and in the extremes, such as the instance we see him slap poor Chaplain Namil's head off his shoulders. So not a great showing on the Lion's part in that instance. He has a keen sense of justice and prosecutes it as if he were the Imperium made manifest, as I am sure the Emperor intended. And lastly, his fortitude is legendary, able to withstand the burdens of innumerable secrets from those he is closest to, as well as the truths of horrible acts he has committed without hesitation, in the name of the Imperium. For the above reasons, I feel we can safely rate the Lion a 2 in regards to his character. There are definitely some flaws that were he to return to the 42nd millennium in the upcoming 10th edition, we'll see some very interesting moments for sure. However, his cold and distant nature stops him from achieving the highest possible score, as it should. Ultimately a master of secrets that does what needs to be done in the name of loyalty, when another would balk at the task. However, a man of deep flaws, which keeps him from becoming likeable among his brothers, and definitely not one that others can find common cause with, other than in the act of fulfilling one's duty. This awards the Lion an overall score of 7. Horus Lupercal. It is no small feat to be considered first among equals, let alone in a fraternity of demigods. As he was the first scattered Primarch to be relocated by the Emperor, Horus had the massive boon of being able to spend quality time with Dad. This meant that not only would Horus and the Emperor become naturally close, the Emperor even telling Horus he is like a son to him, but it allowed him to learn diplomacy and the art of war, from arguably the most adept warlord in the entire galaxy. Firstly, rather than recall all the reasons Horus was crowned War Master, because that's been done to death, I'm going to list 3 Primarchs people often note as valid contenders and quickly state the major flaws they each possess which would have likely seen them fail in their duty of War Master. Because after all, we can mark the achievement of War Master as a major score for Horus, as he achieved it regardless of details, so we may as well have a bit of fun while we speak about it. The 3 contenders we'll speak on are Sanguinius, Rabute, and the Lion. Now, comment below on this one whether you agree or not and what your thoughts are, because I think this debate will remain evergreen and is always worth a revisit. Firstly, the fan favourite Sanguinius. 2 major issues with this one as far as I see it. As we learn in Unremembered Empire, and just generally throughout the novels, Sanguinius is full of self-doubt and puts the needs of others always before himself. Now, as Simon Sinek says, good leaders eat last, and that is very true. However, in a grimdark future of justifiable evils, including worldwide genocides, I truly do not believe Sanguinius would make the harsh calls that had to be made without it slowly undoing the man. Secondly, in the Fear to Tread novel, we see Sanguinius making the absolutely reckless decision of making a deal with a Keeper of Secrets, the demon promising to rid the Blood Angels of their red thirst forevermore if Sanguinius stepped into a chaos-fueled warp device that would likely turn him into a demon prince. Not only would this deprive the Imperium of a Primarch, but the Blood Angels and their Primarch had just learnt of the treachery of the Word-Bearers, and possibly Horus, implication, Nasir Amet joining those dots together. So in all, this is a particularly erroneous move. In Guilliman, his skills as an expert logistician and grand tactician surely would have put him in good stead. However, his inflexibility would make him quite rigid and inflexible, as well as put off his other brothers. In all, Guilliman at the time of Horus's appointment to War Master was far too rigid, though throughout the heresy and the scouring, may have grown enough to finally be able to take on that role and execute it well. In theory, the Lion would be a great War Master, except for the fact he would have to work in closely with others, allowing them to make their own calls in various campaigns and theatres of war, rather than just giving them orders. This basest of issue is the number one reason the Lion could never have been War Master. In all, besides Corvus Corax and sort of Angron, nobody outright hated or didn't get on with Horus. The skill of Horus to stay on side with those of pivotal rank within the Imperial war machine is a tremendous show of his understanding of the psyche and motivations of both baseline humans and his Primarch brothers. For his elevation to War Master and all the accomplishments it took to win the title over from the spear-tip strike straight at the Orc warlord Erlak Erg during the Lunar Crusade, through to his minding and successful command of the Emperor's Prime Crusade fleet during the early years of the Crusade, will mark Horus Lupercal a 3 for achievements. Without mentioning chaos-corrupted elephant in the room in the ominous falling to capricious warp entities and attempted patricide on a grand scale, I did say this is an unbiased as possible consideration, so we aren't going to include that little misstep when we consider his character. We see at least 2 instances throughout the Horus Heresy novels wherein Horus' brother Corvus Corax and Lionel Johnson rebuke Horus for using their legionaries in war rather than his own. In the case of Corvus Corax, this is a very well-founded rebuke towards the newly promoted War Master Horus, as he would carelessly spend the lives of the Raven Guard Legion in a frontal assault where other tactical means were available. This was both out of pride and expedience on Horus' part, but also maybe as a means of power play and control over the Raven Lord's own troops. You see, prior to Corvus' discovery by the Emperor, the Raven Guard were utilised by Horus very closely with his own lunar wolves. The Raven Guard of that time, Terran-born legionaries, modus operandi, was very much one of slaughter and terror, much akin to the Night Lord's Legion. We see the Lion in a similar position during the Zariman campaign, when he discovers that Horus had utilised Luther and his legionaries in his own campaign efforts without first consulting with the Lion. We already know at this point the Lion doesn't play well with others, but to take his toys without asking first is betrayal in the Lion's eyes. The Lion is quoted as saying to Horus on the latter's command bridge, "The lives of my warriors are not yours to spend like coin, Horus. Buy victories with the expense of your own wolves, not my knights." Now, whether this subtle hint that the Lion knows Horus is willing to buy victory by throwing lives away is ultimately unknown. However, the Lion is nothing if not supremely astute. It is difficult to level many misdeeds at Horus, as his want to earn the respect of those he looked up to, paired with the fact that the vast majority of Primarchs and mortals looked up to him, meant it was difficult for Horus to set a foot wrong. It is entirely possible that throughout the novels, Horus' possession of warp charming abilities may have meant he was able to get away with similar atrocities to that of Gate 42 with the Raven Guard. However, we may never know the truth of that. Overall, for misdeeds, I have scored Horus a 2. Were you to build a list of Primarch friendships and positive moments they shared together, you will quickly find that Horus can be viewed as a friend to most of the Primarchs, save again for Corvus Corax and perhaps Angron, who didn't like anybody much anyway. There are two polar opposite character traits which vie for dominance within the overall consideration of Horus' character. These are Horus' charisma in stark contrast to his resentment and want for praise. We see a fair deal of resentment on Horus' part throughout the heresy, as well as caution for others of great ability, such as towards his brother the Lion. The greatest example of this resentment was when the Emperor would bestow the title of War Master upon Horus, before retiring to Terra to continue his secret works on the Webway project. In line with the Emperor's modus operandi, he wouldn't regale his sons with the details of his departure, however, which would serve to plant the seed of doubt. You could argue that Horus' own insecurities and want for glory tended this seed, instead of actively working on expelling or repressing this feeling, though ultimately it was the manipulation of his brother Lorgar and the Dark Pantheon themselves who would capitalise on this original doubt. It is conveyed clearly and quite consistently that besides not originally wanting to be recognised as being superior to his brothers in any way, once he does accept this elevation as part and parcel of the War Master role, Horus does maintain a strong moral code most of the time. He is wise not only as a good leader or mentor, but also as a brother and a father. He bears the burden of command as if it did not trouble him, proving to those close to him that he was naturally the best fit for War Master, the rightful leader of the Emperor's mission to unite the stars. Counter to his stoicism in the face of a galaxy-spanning responsibility, we do witness Horus quite desperate during his campaign against the unsighted kings, wherein after becoming War Master, he has to reconquer a system he had brought into compliance previously due to a malign Xenos mind control which had taken over the free will of the citizens and thus rebelled against the Imperium. Whether it was desperation to quickly retake the territories which had fallen from his grasp, thus reaffirming his honour, or a want to prove himself to his brothers, Horus would prove quite intractable to any suggestions of tactics other than his own, even though his tactics resulted in a substantial loss of life to the Raven Guard Legion. This, all in the name of expediency, or what seems to be ego. In all, Horus is written quite well during the series, and we get the opportunity to see sides of him which are not simply the charismatic guy everyone adores, which is refreshing. In all, we'll round out Horus to a rating of 2 for character, as his negative traits are generally outweighed by his positive. He does quite consistently hold to Aristotle's core values, but once a slit of resentment and insecurity are allowed to infect his thoughts, we do indeed see a darker, perhaps more desperate side of Horus Lupercal. This is a total rating of 7 for the War Master of the Imperium. Corvus Corax. A great mind often overlooked even among his demigod brothers, and quite possibly the best judge of character amongst them. From Corvus' humble beginnings on the moon Lycaeus through to his meeting with the Emperor, the Primarch Corvus Corax would learn much of the wickedness of human nature, as well as the burden and guilt associated with sacrificing the lives of the many for the safety of the masses. From the conflict on Isfane V, seeing him almost able to kill Lorgar but for the timely intervention of Curse, to the tactical insight he would give his brother Rebute, there is one achievement which stands out above the rest when considering the Primarch of the 19th Legion. During the dark period which befell the Raven Guard Legion after the betrayal at Isfane V, the Raven Guard were but a shadow of a legion. Their numbers were so scarce they could not, in fact, hope to contribute to the loyalist efforts throughout the Horus heresy in any meaningful way. In an effort to remedy this and get back in the fight, Corvus would obtain from his father on Terra intact and whole Primarch genome. This is pure genetic material from which each of the Primarch's DNA had been drawn from, so its value to both loyalist and traitor forces alike is immeasurable. Through tireless devotion, Corvus, Magos biologist Nexon Orlendraz, and apothecary Vasench VI were able to utilize this genetic material to eventually create the gene seed responsible for transforming a human into a space marine. Not only that, because of the purity and therefore power of the source Primarch material, the aspirants implanted with this gene seed had their Astartes organs mature more rapidly than the usual implantation process, and upon full maturity were more powerful than standard Astartes. This truly was a discovery which would not only revolutionize Astartes recruitment, it would give the loyalists a competitive edge they so sorely needed to help in the war effort against their treacherous brothers and cousins. Unfortunately, nobody in the grimdark future is allowed to have nice things for long, and the Alpha Legion, as we covered in part 1 of this series, would infect the gene seed and make off with the pure, uninfected sample for themselves. This is a shame indeed, however we shouldn't let it detract from the genius efforts of these three men, as they achieved what would likely have taken an army of specialists within the gene labs back on Terra the same time to achieve. For achievements, we will award Corvus a 2, as being the principal lead in such a breakthrough in Space Marine genetics truly is a massive feat, even if he had help. There isn't much you could hold against Corvus Corax in terms of misdeeds, however there is one transgression I cannot abide and need to raise as a part of this consideration. After the forces of the arch-traitor were defeated and beat back from their entrenchment within Terra's orbit, the flames of civil war were beginning to recede. It was a time of dying legends where the galaxy had known the rule of godlike beings, though also witnessed atrocities wrought by demons. This was a time when the remaining loyal Primarchs, for the good of humanity, should have rallied together to forge a new and stable imperium in lieu of their father the Emperor, and lacking guidance from old hands such as Malcador the Sigillite. For Corvus' part, instead of pouring his energy into this task, he was instead racked by guilt over the failings of his genetic project. You see, due to the contamination which the Alpha Legion had introduced, the next round of aspirants to receive the Raven Guard gene seed were turned into grisly, raven-like mutants. After they were used best they could throughout the Heresy Wars, Corvus was forced to put them all down himself, an act which rocked him to his very core. With a new rage burning inside of him, Corvus would venture into the warp on a hunt to finally end the existence of each of his traitorous brothers. This is well and good, and embodies the Moritat doctrine he so wholly promoted. However, humankind and his legion, at this time chapters, would have benefited greatly from his leadership and sense of justice during these dark days. We will award Corvus a 2 for misdeeds. He's quite wholesome, but this one issue does besmirch his otherwise clear slate. In the Lord of Shadows novel, we see one of his Terran-born legionaries stating that his Primarch, Corax, highly values human life, freedom, and justice. Given this comes from a Terran-born legionary, he would have been in the company of his gene-father for quite some time, and formed his opinion both under pressure amid campaign and when retired between battles. This is a great start for the Raven Lord, as our main forms of measure for character scoring are the traits of wisdom, temperance, justice, and fortitude. We witness a great deal of fortitude and determination from Corax when he leads his savage legion back to safety from Isthvain 5, a miracle in and of itself. He does not lament and give in or create a hopeless plan of vengeance, but instead doubles down on rebuilding his forces amid the fires of civil war. Knowing when discretion is the better part of honour is the mark of a wise man, and we see this when Corvus Corax convinces Bjorn the Fell-Handed to lead his Space Wolves forces out of engagement from traitor forces, lest they lose their remaining numbers and wounded Primarch for good. It could be said that a Primarch down on their luck in the way Corvus was may sense an opportunity to utilise another's forces for their own ends in the way vengeance can warp the heart of a man. However, Corvus proved too noble to tread that path and ensured the Wolves, Leman Russ included, would survive to engage the foe on more favourable terms. Criticised by many of his Primarch brothers prior to the heresy for the way he would utilise his forces in hit-and-run actions, small aggressive forays into enemy-held territories, as well as the use of Moritat specialists, Corvus would bear this judgment stoically and even provide positive insight to Rebute on how some of the tenets were worthy of putting into practice. The one brother with whom we see Corvus clash with in the most volatile way is Horus Lupercal. One of Horus' most defining abilities was his skill in wielding his natural charisma to bring others on board with his ideas, smooth out disagreements, and motivate his brothers when the need arose. It is said that this ability was an inheritance from the Emperor himself, much like Rebute's logistical acumen or Magnus' warp-spawned power. Regarding Corvus though, a being who it's said could see through warp-based trickery, facades such as these did not fool him. He did not trust Horus, and on one instance swore never to work with his brother again, after Horus' choices as War Master would see an unnecessarily large tally of death mar the Raven Guard Legion. Interestingly, Corvus draws similarities between himself and his brother Kurz, claiming he had the potential to have grown into the monster that Kurz did. Regarding these ponderings by the Raven Lord, we can see similarities in the two's approach to warfare, and can consider that both were raised in oppressive, harsh environs, where they were forced to make horrific decisions to reach their penultimate goal, Corax in his choices to utilise atomic weaponry, and Kurz his harsh sense of justice. Overall, regarding character, I believe the Lord of the 19th is often overlooked for the more flamboyant or boisterous of his brothers, rather than appreciated for the beast he truly was. Even in the face of utter defeat, his legion in tatters, Corvus would continue the good fight, and when being almost bullied by his brother in his role as War Master, Corvus had the guts to back himself and withdrew his troops permanently from the War Master's control. A truly brave move. In all, I believe a 3 for Corvus is just and right. This brings his total rating to a healthy and respectable 7. We'll compare our recent scores in combination with those of Part 1 and 2 from descending to ascending order, because remember, the point of this exercise is to decide once and for all who is the worst Primarch. As we can see, Angron has pipped all the Primarchs who were sitting on a score of 4, with the lowest score yet. Keep in mind though, in our next video, we'll be discussing the Primarchs Rogel Dawn, Fulgrim, Jagatai, Conrad Kurz, and Vulcan. I wonder if any of these Primarchs could match Angron for worst, or possibly reach the heights Sanguinius and Rebute were able to achieve. Okay, comment below if you agree with this list so far. I know it will probably get the ire up of some die-hard fans of particular Primarchs, but honestly, I think that's a great thing. At the end of the day, Black Library have more often than not hit the nail on the head with painting such a diverse and deep setting full of interesting characters that we the fan base become very invested in. So yes, don't take it personally, but definitely be passionate about your likes and dislikes. And do remember, we are trying to be factual and logical as possible. Now if you haven't seen the first 2 parts, make sure you head over and watch those, mate. Otherwise this video on our end screen is the one YouTube believes you'd most be interested in. As always, have a good one, take it easy.